All right, here we go again. So this is picking up after part one of the 50 years of the first part of the 20th century and all of the false flags and manipulations that the ruling class has put us through that has basically dragged us down this path to where we are today. Everything that we're living today was built on the foundation of all of these events that I'm discussing here. And my argument is, my point is that I think a lot of these were done to help steer us down the path of where we are today, which is so just amazingly far down the road to hell. And my argument is that a lot of these were done that were moves along that path, moves on the chessboard. And I had just finished up part one with the Zimmerman memo, and that's what drug us into World War I. And so my point in that one, if you haven't caught that part yet, was this was sort of the last straw. Woodrow Wilson wanted to get us into World War I from early in his administration, but he ran on the slogan, "He kept us out of war," and that's what got him into office. Once he got into office, he was definitely pro-war. The sinking of the Lusitania was one of the false flags that sort of one of those things that led us closer and closer to that decision to get into the war, but it wasn't a couple years later with the Zimmerman memo where we reached that point where it's like, that's it. This is the last straw, we're going to war. And that's quite often what they do. They do something so bad that we feel like our very survival is at stake and we have no choice but to go to war. And then we can do that as the good guys because it's the bad guys that has put us into this position when in reality, it's the very people that were agreeing to take us to war that set those conditions up. All right? So that was the Zimmerman memo. A couple things I want to talk about that I'm not going to, I'm not going to, I don't think what's the next thing here? Yeah, we got to talk about. Okay, so what I want to just for a minute bring into focus during this time, it's 1917. Not only is World War I going on, but 1917 is when the Bolshevik Revolution occurred in Russia. So you've got Russia fighting on the side of the Allies, but meanwhile they're being overrun, and they're being overrun by Bolshevik communists. And I'm not going to go into too much detail now, but I'm currently reading a book called Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution. And it really shows all the tentacles of Wall Street and the financing. And really, it was that side of American politics and wealth that funded the Bolshevik Revolution. But what I'm also seeing is Germany was also supporting and funding the Bolshevik Revolution. So, the reason I'm laying this groundwork is by the time we get to World War II, you're going to see a little bit more of the history of where was Germany at the time that led to the rise of Hitler. And I've brought that up in other videos, that I think that context is really helpful. So you have the Bolsheviks taking over Russia. They're being funded by Germany and the US. And so the German government at the time, and they're at war with Russia, the German government is more politically aligned with, the communist ideology, which this Bolshevism is really, that's what it's called. And that was just the group, they call themselves the Bolsheviks. You got the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks that were in power in Russia, and eventually the Mensheviks got beat out and the Bolsheviks took complete power. And so think about that. World War I, that's where Germany is, right? And they're at war, and this political ideology is raging through Germany that's splitting the culture, most likely because you still had more traditionalists, and we're going into the 20s, out of the teens into the 20s. And one of the things I wanted to talk about, so even after World War I, so let's real quick, Bolshevik Revolution, the czars were executed, communism was established in Europe, and I've read that was part of the overall, one of the reasons for that. So they wanted to get rid of the czars model of government because they couldn't control it as much. They had too much power. So if they could topple the czars and the monarchs in the European countries, then they could establish sort of a democracy, and then they could control those people more than they could the monarchs. So that's part of why all this was happening. All right, so the czars were executed, but a significant event that occurred in Germany was in 1923, the Frankfurt School was opened. And that's when that communist Marxist ideology really took hold. And that was one of the leading forces of that ideology was in Germany, in Frankfurt, in the early 20s. So, Germany loses the war. They have horrific reparations. You've got these radical commies taken over, and they've already taken over Russia. And so this influence is growing. This is becoming a big deal. And I wanted to point that out because, Germany in the context of World War I, all of this, and World War II, again, kind of starts to make a little more sense. I'm not excusing anything Hitler did, but, he ran on a platform of more nationalist and traditional culture restoration. And a lot of the German people were, that's what they wanted. They didn't want, they didn't want all this woke stuff that we're experiencing the last 4 years. That was happening in Germany in the early 20s under this Frankfurt ideology. And the German people were appalled. The overt sexuality, the transgenderism, anything goes, all of that was being shoved down the German people's throat, just like it's being shoved down our throat now. And we're sick of it, and we don't like it, and we want it to stop. We're reliving history, all right? So let me just read a little bit about, if you haven't read about the Frankfurt School, here's just a little bit about it. And this first came on my radar really when I was nowhere near the level of kind of awake that I am now. And it was probably about 2008, 2007, 2009, somewhere in there. And I was just seeing, it must have been 8 or 9 because Obama was in office. And I was just seeing this, my eyes had just been smashed open with this radicalness that I saw. The media abandoned us. The fact that Obama got elected in the first place was just insane to me with his radical ideology and the Marxism and the professor, what's his name, at the church that just preached all this liberation theology. And I'm just like, what the hell is going on? And it was showing up everywhere. It was in our schools. At the time I was married, had 2 young stepdaughters that were in middle school and high school, and they were bringing home this most unbelievable social engineering crap. And I was like, this is nuts. So I typed in one day, who stole my culture? Who stole our culture? Because that's what it looked like. My culture's gone. Culture I was raised in and believe in and thought America was, that's gone, even 15, 16 years ago. And what came up was an article that is, this is it. I'm not going to read it all, but I'm going to read a little bit of it. And this really opened my eyes because it got the Frankfurt School and this Marxist ideology, social engineering, slow walk through the institutions on my radar. And it began to make more sense why we were going through what we were going through. So I'll read a little bit of this to you. You've probably covered a lot of this yourself too, but if not, here we go. All right, sometimes during the last half, so yeah, who stole our culture? And that is exactly what I Googled back then. Bam, this popped up. Sometime during the last half century, someone stole our culture. And this was 2018. Well, this is a whole different, no, it was way earlier than that I first read it. So this is a redo of it or something to freshen it up or something. All right, just 50 years ago in the 1950s, America was a great place. It was safe, it was decent, children got good education in the public schools, even blue-collar fathers brought home middle-class incomes so moms could stay home with the kids. Television shows reflected sound traditional values. Where did it all go? Hopefully you've all asked that question yourself because you've seen it. You've seen it just go right out the window in the last 20 years plus. How did that America become the sleazy, decadent place we live in today? So different that those who grew up prior to the 60s feel like it's a foreign country. Did it just happen? It didn't just happen. In fact, a deliberate agenda was followed to steal our culture and leave a new one and very different one in its place. The story of how and why is one of the most important parts of our nation's history, and it is a story almost no one knows. The people behind it wanted it that way. Right? And I'm going to probably, when I post these videos on Rumble, I will probably put links to all of these, so if you just kind of want to revisit it and read the whole thing, it'll be there. Early Marxist theory. All right, after World War I ended in 1918, Marxist theorists had to ask themselves the question, what went wrong? As good Marxists, they could not admit Marxist theory had been incorrect. Instead, 2 leading Marxist intellectuals, Antonio Gramsci, probably heard, if you've studied this stuff, you've heard that name, in Italy, and George Lukács in Hungary. Lukács was considered the most brilliant Marxist thinker since Marx himself, independently came up with the same answer. They said that Western culture and the Christian religion had so blinded the working class to its true Marxist class interest that a communist revolution was impossible in the West until both could be destroyed. Christian religion, yeah. That objective, established as cultural Marxism's goal right at the beginning, has never changed. And hopefully you've all studied all this stuff. Slow march through the institutions and all that. Gramsci famously laid out a strategy for destroying Christianity and Western culture, which they've been spectacularly successful at. Just look around today. It's obvious, self-evident, I like to say. One that has proven all too successful. Instead of calling for a communist revolution up front, as in Russia, he said Marxists in the West should take political power last after a long march through the institutions. And that's pretty much where we've been the last 4 years. They've taken power. There's just absolutely no doubt. And they own the institutions. Absolutely no doubt. They're here. They're at the door. They've been in the room. The schools, the media, even the churches, every institution that could influence the culture. That long march through the institutions is what America has experienced, especially since the 60s. Fortunately, Mussolini recognized the danger Gramsci posed and jailed him. His influence remained small until the 1960s when his works, especially Prison Notebooks, were rediscovered. George Lukács, I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly, whatever, proved more influential. In 1918, he became Deputy Commissar for Culture in the short-lived Belakoon Bolshevik regime in Hungary. Austria, Hungary, Germany, all aligned. So this is all in the same neighborhood. They're asking, who will save us from Western civilization? See, commies trying to save society from traditional culture. So this battle's been going on, the one we're fighting right now, been going on a long time in countries in Western civilization. He instituted what he called cultural terrorism. One of its main components was introducing sex education into Hungarian schools. Seeing it here, right? Early age, elementary school. Lukács realized that if he could destroy the country's traditional sexual morals, he would have taken a giant step toward destroying its traditional culture and Christian faith. Far from rallying to Lukács' cultural terrorism, the Hungarian working class was so outraged by it, what we've been going through the last 4 years, that when Romania invaded Hungary, the workers would not fight for the Belakoon government, and it fell. Lukács disappeared, but not for long. In 1923, he turned up at a Marxist study week in Germany. Man, it sound familiar? I mean, this is history. This is our history right now playing out. It's no different. And people think that this is so radical and so extreme that we've never experienced. No, this was happening 100 years ago. Everything we're seeing today. It's just crazy. All right, he went to study week in Germany, the Frankfurt School. Whale responded, a program sponsored by a young Marxist named Felix Whale, who had inherited millions, of course, some rich, commie, fucking retard, nothing to do but try to destroy humanity. She doesn't appreciate what it takes to actually survive instead of just inheriting. I mean, how many people come from money and they just turn into this? Because they have no clue what it's like to really experience life and trying to build a life on your own. Man, I'm not saying they're all that way, but I'm just saying there's a lot of that. Whale responded by using some of his money to set up a new think tank at Frankfurt University in Frankfurt, Germany. Originally, it was to be called the Institute for Marxism. That's a little too obvious. But the cultural Marxists realized they could be far more deceptive, if they concealed their real nature and objectives. Yeah, of course. All right, so that's as far as I went, just to give you a taste of that. So cultural Marxism making its way through Germany, Frankfurt School, and before you know it, we have the rise of Hitler and all of that. But I won't get to that now. So I'm just kind of going through these significant events. That was one that we really didn't feel the impact of until later. But another significant this is a cultural event, not just military or political, but this was a cultural event that was a step. You look at what the agenda is. Cultural Marxism separate us from Christianity and our Western culture, right? So the next thing that came to mind with that is, I don't know if y'all remember this, but we studied it in school and it was shoved down our throats, remembering the Scopes monkey trial. This is the trial that paved the way for the theory of evolution. And I'm not going to read this whole thing. You can go through it. It's very interesting to revisit. And, it's kind of whitewashes it all, but it does it does give the benchmarks, historical markers of what happened and when, who was involved. And I'm just going to point to one thing, and this was like a false flag too, because I think that there was a group that they were looking for somebody that would violate the cultural norms that were in place and laws that were in place regarding what you can and can't teach. And they found somebody, and he was a PE teacher. And he started teaching this, and then they wanted a lawsuit because they wanted to win through lawfare. They didn't want to try to take this through, the public with a popular vote or something like that, and they didn't want to stand as part of their agenda. They wanted to win this through lawfare. All right, so they created this. And the same thing was done with Roe v. Wade. She was set up, recruited to help them fight this battle. That just part of the cultural, push that they're trying to make. So they do that a lot too. All right, so I'm going to go down, but one of the significant voices fighting against this was William Jennings Bryan, and he was trying to stop this from happening, right? And so the verdict of the Scopes trial came out, and so that became sort of, you now can teach this in school. And the funny thing is, William 5 days after the Scopes trial ends, William Jennings Bryan dies in his sleep. Could just be coincidental. I don't know, right? I don't know. You tell me. Were they trying to take somebody off the playing field? Or just as punishment for fighting them in the first place? You just see this kind of stuff happening all the time. People mysteriously dying at just certain times. Just a random coincidence. All right, so that's the Scopes trial. If you want to read that, again, significant cultural event that helped weaken the traditionalist Christian sort of faith-based teaching in school, and has just wreaked havoc. And if you still believe in evolution, hopefully you'll realize one day that evolution is a complete farce. The theory of evolution is bunk, and it's easy to prove it. And that's what got me back, and this was probably, again, another 15 years ago, when it became painfully obvious to me that I'd been misled. Because I believed it. Just when you're a kid, you just lap all this up because the teacher's the expert. Why would they lie to you, right? Well, now we know why they would lie to us. All right, so we got the Scopes trial, 1925. So we go a little bit further, and another significant event that occurred was the manipulation of the American mind. And who do we have to thank for that? In 1928, I believe, Edward Bernays releases the book Propaganda. And he is the pioneer of what is now called public relations, when it's really just propaganda to trick people into believing what you're saying. And that has been so weaponized against the American people. The power of his work cannot be understated. And how they use it on us every day to devastating effect. It's all propaganda. And it's this manipulation of us through subconscious and even conscious manipulation, where we just believe what they say because we think that we can trust them. And hopefully by now, anybody watching this knows you can't trust what our government, what the media, it's just, we're in this control system of propaganda, and we're just bombarded by it daily. And Edward Bernays is really who we have to thank for kicking all this off. All right, so let me just read a little bit on that. All right, Bernays pioneered public relations, often referred to as the father of public relations. Bernays in 1928 published his seminal work, Propaganda, in which he argued that public relations is not a gimmick, but a necessity. Oh, this is it. This right here tells you the mindset of these elites. And he was the nephew, I think, of Sigmund Freud. So he's in the club. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes are formed, and our ideas are suggested largely by men we have never heard of. It is they who pull the wires that control the public mind. Could not be better said. That is 100% manipulation. Everything everything from what we think is popular on TV, and you know, they're not perfect at it, but they have a lot of influence over that. Look at fashion. Oh, the popular designs of the season. Well, who says who? Not the people, because they've never seen them before. But they're this group of experts that have decided, oh, this is what's popular, and just people lap it up and they go running out and buying all that stuff. Oh yeah, this is what's cool now because somebody said it was cool. And then so all they need is somebody with a significant platform, you know, an actor, a musician, or whatever, to be attached to that. And next thing you know, humanity's running towards it. Yeah, it's so effective. That simple example shows you how effective this manipulation is. It's not people that decided what's popular. We get told what's supposed to be popular and cool and what are culturally significant events, and people buy it. They don't think for themselves. And I mean, I get it. It's easy to fall in line and be part of the masses and just go along with it. But that's where this stuff came from. And that statement right there just says it all. Manipulate the masses, and you're the one with power. And they have the power to do it. All right, Bernays was also Freud's nephew twice over. His mother was Freud's sister Anna, and his father, Eli Bernays, was the brother of Freud's wife, Martha. So it's a big, happy family. All right, he went to Cornell in agriculture, got a degree, but instead of farming, he chose a career in journalism, eventually helping the Woodrow Wilson administration promote the idea that U.S. efforts in World War I were intended to bring democracy to Europe. And that's where all that propaganda of, you know, you demonize your enemy, you turn them into animals, into subhumans, so you can justify killing them. And I don't know how far I'll go into it in this video, but what we did in World War II to the German people, a lot of them who didn't deserve what they got. And it's because, you know, the demonization is so effective. And we'll sit idly by as our mercenaries just slaughter innocent people. You know, we did it in Iraq, and we've done it before. And I hope people can wake up to this war machine. And I'm no dove. I mean, I'm hawkish. You defend your borders. Anybody, you know, carry a big stick. But when you see when it's abused, as it has been quite a bit throughout the last 100 years, you become very discontent with that machine. And we're constantly manipulated into supporting it, like I was during the war with Iraq. I wasn't awake enough yet to see the propaganda, and I didn't believe anything about all the people killed, all of that. I fell for the public relations propaganda, and I was just a useful idiot back then. You know, if we can't admit that, then how do we grow? I mean, I was a normie big time 25 years ago. But, you know, hopefully something, you know, wakes people up. And that's all we can do is try to wake them up. All right, let's see. Intended to bring democracy to Europe. Yeah, that's what it was for. Having seen how effective propaganda could be during war, Bernays wondered whether it might prove equally useful during peacetime, yet propaganda had acquired a somewhat pejorative connotation, which would be further magnified during World War II, so Bernays promoted the term public relations. Drawing on the insights of his uncle Sigmund, a relationship Bernays was always quick to mention, he developed an approach he dubbed the engineering of consent. Control and regiment the masses according to our will without their knowing about it. To do so, it was necessary to appeal not to the rational part of the mind, but the unconscious. A more basis, thinking. A more basic thinking. There. Bernays' publicity campaigns were the stuff of legend. To overcome sales resistance to cigarette smoking among women, Bernays staged a demonstration at the 1929 Easter Parade, having fashionable young women flaunt their torches of freedom. And if you've read about that, that's propaganda at work. You know, women were fighting for their rights, you know, to vote and all that, and it was seen as a torch of freedom to be smoking as a woman because you were going against the cultural norm that women were not supposed to smoke. It's all manufactured consent. In the 1930s, he promoted cigarettes as both soothing to the throat and slimming to the waistline. Oh man, it's just crazy. Okay, so that's that. I'm not going to go any more of that. So, but that propaganda, again, designed, implemented, it's used pervasively in our culture by the people at the top of all this, and I'll get into a little bit more of that as we continue on. But I still got quite a few more items to cover, and I don't want this to go on too long. All right, so next thing that happens, Great Depression, late 20s. Not going to go into detail on that. Do your own research. Whoops, oh, what did I just do? Okay, so how? All right, so FDR becomes president. We're still recovering from the Great Depression. FDR takes us off the gold standard. So to me, I thought this was one of those significant events that really changed the economic trajectory of the country. Because back then, I mean, it was a big deal to own hard assets. I mean, it still is now, but the masses were generally more educated on those matters. And so when you think about after the Great Depression, never let a crisis go to waste, and the, commie filth Democrats wasted no time. And so they swept FDR on promises of change and all this help. Well, all the change is mostly just government programs. So what are government programs? I mean, it's a form of socialism. So we're certainly not a purely capitalist society, and we haven't been since the establishment of the Federal Reserve and income tax, and then all of these programs that FDR implemented to great, applause by the public, because, I mean, they'd been through a tough time. And some of this, I get it. Great Depression was rough. But we basically sold our soul when we did that. And I think I've got a little bit to cover here on the Great Depression and taking us off the gold standard. Okay. All right, so during extreme crisis, governments can also seize people's gold, which had happened before, not just in America, but in other developed countries. And there have been some stunning examples of gold confiscation. Most memorably, this occurred in the U.S. in 1933 during the Great Depression, albeit it's more accurate to call it a nationalization than a confiscation, since citizens were compensated. Not fairly, one can argue. The government of Franklin D. Roosevelt seized all gold bullion and coins via Executive Order 6102, forcing citizens to sell at well below market rates. Known for that. Immediately after the confiscation, the government set a new official rate for gold that was much higher as part of the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. Man, All right. Many gold owners were understandably unhappy about the gold seizure, and some fought it in the courts. Ultimately, however, the government could not be stopped, and gold ownership remained illegal in the U.S. until the 70s. And how many people even know that today? Walk up to the average 20-something. Do they know this? And they're just so ill-informed because none of this stuff is being taught. So we have to hopefully wake up somewhere else, somewhere along the way in our adulthood, that something triggers us to be curious and do some more research. Because we certainly aren't getting it in school these days. All right, in the 1930 system, countries generally chose fixed exchange rates linked to gold plus free capital movement and sacrificed control of monetary policy. Yeah, there's a thing where you've got like horns of the trilemma. There's three basic policies. You can't get all three of them, so you have to sacrifice one. One of them is setting a fixed exchange rate. Two is allowing capital to move freely over international borders. And three is being able to independently set interest rates and print money. In other words, control monetary policy. And the general theory is you can't do all three of those. You can do two of them well, but one of them is going to suffer. All right, so they generally chose fixed exchange rates linked to gold, plus free capital movement and sacrifice control of monetary policy. The system came under more and more pressure because too many investors were trading in their money for gold. One way for the U.S. to take enough control of monetary policy to print more money was to impose various capital controls, including seizure of gold. All right, so that gets a lot of wonkiness going on there. Okay, so took us off the gold standard. They're printing money to fund the wars. So now I don't have a chart up, but you can look at the national debt chart. Shortly after we get into World War I, the national debt is created and becomes a constant. And taking us off the gold standard allowed that to continue. Printing of fiat currency to fund our follies and not having to peg it to gold, because there was just no way they could acquire enough gold, even if they pegged it on a fractional basis, which apparently, after reading this, you can do that, where it's not like dollar for dollar. So that we're off to the races with the national debt with this. All right. And so then what happens around the same time? We're getting out of the Depression. We elect FDR, takes us off the gold standard. And next comes the big sweeping social reform of the New Deal. So let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, our country was really permanently changed after a lot of these policies. And some of these, I mean, I get it. I'm not against helping people. There's got to be a way to do it that doesn't create this strong, all-powerful, centralized government, though. That's the problem. Too much power in too few hands. And this is what helped them get it. All right, so let's just talk about a few of the issues of the New Deal that helped them kind of nudge us down the path that we're on now to their spectacular success at the expense of us, the humans, the useless eaters, as Bill Gates or whoever, all of them call us. All right, the domestic program known as the New Deal, intended to stem the effects of the Great Depression, was launched by the administration of U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1933. The purpose of the program was to provide immediate economic relief to those struggling under unprecedentedly high levels of unemployment. The New Deal also brought on reforms in industry, agricultural, finance, water power, labor, housing, vastly increasing the scope of the federal government activities in these areas. Some of these programs were really good. We needed an FDA. We needed a Food and Drug Administration to regulate and monitor the food growing capacity to make sure they were following certain standards. The problem is it's been taken over by these radicals and now it's been weaponized against us and our food is crap. But the purpose of it and the idea of it makes perfect sense. I don't want just runaway out of control companies serving up whatever and calling it whatever they want based on propaganda. But that's basically what they're doing now because the FDA answers to the food companies and they all change positions back and forth. You know, this guy leaves the FDA and goes and runs whatever company, and this guy that runs whatever company, food company, goes and works as the head of the FDA, and it's just two sides of the same, equation greasing each other's skids. So it's completely broken. All right, so let's talk about those a little bit. The term New Deal was taken from Roosevelt's speech accepting the Democratic nomination for the presidency on July 2nd, 1932, reacting to the ineffectiveness of the administration of U.S. President Herbert Hoover in meeting the ravages of the Great Depression. And Herbert Hoover gave us, some of the roaring 20s, and the economy in the 20s was really good. And who knows what went on, if there was any sabotage or whatever on the economy, or it was just one of those natural cycles of not having a smooth monetary system. I don't know. I haven't done that research. President Hoover, in meeting the ravages of the Great Depression, American voters overwhelmingly voted in favor of the democratic process of a New Deal for the forgotten man the following November. The bulk of New Deal legislation came within the first 3 months of Roosevelt's first term. Never let a crisis go to waste, and move fast. Whenever they're doing this stuff, healthcare, when Obama got elected, I mean, they were going a mile a minute, pushing as hard and fast as they could to cram these radical programs down our throats before anybody had a chance to complain about it or resist it. Speed is one of their tools when it comes to times like this, and they never let a crisis go to waste. All right. First term, known as the 100 Days. The new administration's first objective was to alleviate the suffering of the nation's huge number of unemployed workers. It created civil works, and I get these. I mean, early when I was a teenager, I worked in one of these programs when it was still active. And I knew I was working in a government program, and I didn't like it. I wanted a real job. I didn't want a government handout. And I was working for the Forest Service under this, though. I got paid by the Civilian Conservation Corps back in the late 70s. And I didn't like it. And as soon as I had an opportunity to actually join and be an employee of the Forest Service, I jumped at it. And I became a real employee with a real job with a real company. Which, well, it's not a real company, but it was at least an established program, not just a government handout because they were trying to put people to work. All right, anyway, enough of that. One of the first New Deal measures to be enacted was the National Industrial Recovery Act, which created the National Recovery Administration. The law authorized the president to institute industry-wide codes intended to eliminate unfair trade practices, reduce unemployment, establish minimum wages and maximum hours, and guarantee the right of labor to bargain collectively. And some of this stuff was needed. I mean, I'm sure if you've done any research, you understand the working conditions in factories at that time were rough. Child labor, excessive hours, horrible conditions, and just, and that was just greedy capitalism, right? And so there was, just like, happening in China now. Look at some of the labor practices in China. They're horrible. It's slavery. Slave wages, slave conditions, it's horrible. They need some of these. There's got to be a minimum accountability. But is this pure socialism? I mean, that's the slippery slope. So I don't know, but I certainly understand the need for some of this. The Agricultural Adjustment Administration sought to control the production of key crops by providing cash subsidies to farmers, which we're still doing today. I think there's some, and these farmlands are being bought up, more and more by these big corporations. I don't know, is it being abused? I'd like to see somebody do a video on that. I mean, there's all kinds of research that can be done on any one of these topics. And I'm just trying to give a little bit of background on it all to see how we've been manipulated down a path to where we are today. And very little of it was just random. It was all by, ruling powers, trying to fulfill an agenda, nudging us down a path. The federal government also reached into the area of electric power, establishing in 1933 the Tennessee Valley Authority. The Wagner Act of 1935 greatly increased the authority of the federal government, industrial relations, and strengthened the organizing power of labor unions, which at the time made sense, but now have become just political tools, right? So they've just gone way beyond their original need. The act established a National Labor Relations Board to execute this program. Perhaps the most far-reaching programs of the entire New Deal were the Social Security measures enacted in 35 and 39, providing old age and widows benefits, unemployment compensation, and disability insurance. I mean, some of that's reasonable, but all of that is more socialistic policies. So do we want to be a purely capitalist society, or do we need some backstops to help people out? All right. So, but again, it helped, set that standard of socialism to where we can no longer say, oh, we just want pure capitalism. Well, we gave that up almost 100 years ago. All right, so that's the New Deal, that's economic. Let's look at what happened. That's 1933, so we roll into 1934, and this is like, how many of you have read about this? But, Smedley Butler, the 1930s plot to overthrow the president. So, and this I think is legit. I mean, I've read up on it. I think this happened. And so this is the 30s. This is as Hitler is rising. And there's a faction of Americans that are really behind Hitler. And I get it. Some of the stuff he stood for early on, I could see why people would have been behind Hitler. And then he turned into maniac, genocidal lunatic, right? So, but he did, you read his early speeches. I haven't read many, but I've read a few excerpts. And he definitely had a pro-nationalist, populist, pro-traditional culture tone to him, because he had seen the horrors of this radical communist Frankfurt School cultural Marxism agenda that had been unleashed in Germany, and people were screaming to do something about it. He did. All right, so there was this, there was growing communism and growing fascism were alive and well. And it's almost like the Republican and Democrat Party were each wearing that hat. I mean, the Democrats loved Stalin. They loved what was going on in Russia. You can read about that. And the Republicans that were pro-business loved what was going on with Hitler, because he was more pro, helping businesses. I think that his nationalist tendencies maybe got out of hand a little bit, but he was more pro-business side than pro-communist. And so it's like the Democrats and the Republicans, that strain was there in both of them. If you start reading up on the history of both of these parties, what they've gone through over the decades and these hundreds of years. And so it's just crazy stuff to read. All right, so Smedley Butler in the 30s, with the rise of Hitler and his sort of fascist government. In 1934, a colossal claim reached the American news media. There had been a plot to overthrow President Roosevelt, who was just basically communist. He was a socialist. There's just no way around it. In favor of a fascist government, which wouldn't be any better. So, I mean, neither party's done us any favors here. Supposedly in the works since 1933, the claims of the conspiracy came from a very conspicuous and reliable source, Major General Smedley Butler, one of the most decorated war heroes of his time. Even more unbelievable were his claims of who was involved in the plot. Respected names like Robert Sterling Clark, Grayson M.P. Murphy, and Prescott Bush. Yeah, read up on him if you haven't already. The Bush family, if you don't know who they really are, it's worth doing that research. They are not friends of America. They are just horribly evil people. While news media at the time mocked Butler's story, recently discovered archives have revealed the truth behind Major General Butler's claims. And you got to remember that, during World War II, there was a lot of capitalist money was going over to support Hitler's war machine. So that's the tie in there to the fascism and to the, the ruling, class, the Morgans and those guys, the money, the Rockefellers, Ford, the IBM invented the machine to tag the Jews, supposedly, all that. All right, so there he is in all his glory and integrity. All right, Butler was approached, so the business plot. Butler was approached by Gerald C. McGuire and Bob Doyle in 1933. During the first meeting with Butler, McGuire and Doyle asked the Major General to speak at a Legion convention in Chicago, and Butler was really doing a lot of advocacy for veterans, and so he was considered kind of one of the leaders, an icon in that work, and that comes into play here. However, over subsequent meetings with the two men, Butler quickly began to suspect that something was amiss. Even worse was the speech that McGuire asked Butler to deliver, a speech which had little to do with Veterans Affairs and instead was more critical of President Franklin Roosevelt's recent move away from the gold standard. The abandonment of the gold standard was a major sticking point for many high-ranking officials and bankers in the country during 1933, although there were several recognized issues with money backed by gold, such as dependency on gold production and short-term price instabilities. Many bankers were fearful that their gold-backed loans would not be paid back in full by the president's new policies. The departure from the gold standard just added to the other concerns about FDR's policies, particularly his plans to provide subsidizations and jobs for the poor, which businessmen and conservative politicians all took as an indication of Roosevelt's socialist leanings, which they were, or even worse, a communist, which could be argued. Butler could sense this disgruntlement when he asked to meet with McGuire's superior and found himself speaking with Robert Sterling Clark, an heir to the singer-sewing fortune. Clark was much more upfront than McGuire, telling Butler that his real interest was in preserving the gold standard, even claiming that he had $30 million and was willing to spend half of the $30 million to save the other half. Butler, true to his patriotic form, flatly refused the offer to deliver the speech. At the convention in Chicago, he described a facet of French government which was run quite well by bankers. So yeah, I guess one of them went over to Europe and was supposedly doing some research on whether or not a fascist dictatorship would work. Came back saying that it was the thing to do. I guess Italy had a fascist dictatorship, Germany did. All right, okay, so he was operated within foreign governments. After discounting the governments of Germany and Italy, he described a facet of French government which was run quite well by veterans. So the idea was range this army, overthrow the government, put in a bunch of veterans. So that's how they're trying to appeal to Smedley Butler. All right, the McCormick-Dickstein Committee investigation. Astonished by McGuire's plans, Butler knew he would need someone to corroborate his story if he was going to stop the intended coup. McGuire told French that he believed a fascist state was the only answer for America, and that Smedley was the ideal leader because he could organize 1 million men overnight. It's just crazy. All right, so those implicated, ranging from the DuPont family to Prescott Bush, the grandfather of future President George W. Bush, laughed off Butler's claims. Evidence of the validity of Butler's testimony was not released until the 21st century, when the committee's papers were published in the public domain. No one was ever prosecuted in connection to the plot. Butler, for his part, went on to continue advocating for veterans. He also became a staunch opponent of capitalism, which he felt fed war efforts. Yeah, if you cronies screwed up war machine capitalism. His views were published in his well-known short book, War is a Racket, which was published in 1935. There is no telling how far the plot to overthrow the presidency may have gone without Butler's intervention. So we had a legitimate plot to overthrow the American government and install a fascist dictatorship in the 30s. You all probably know that, but there's a lot of people that don't. And it was by, the Prescott, Bush, all of that. That was more Republican side of the aisle because they saw the Democrats going full communism and they wanted no part of it. All right. So the next thing, we go from that. We're going to skip a few years. We're getting into World War I, another false flag. We knew about Pearl Harbor. The information's there. I'm going to skip this because I think most people are probably aware of this, just so we can kind of get this wrapped up. It's running pretty long here. All right, so false flag on Pearl Harbor is what got us into World War II. We now know that that was a false flag, and we were set up We wanted to get into that war because, again, if you read the globalist and information about them in their books and everything, you understand these wars have been created to steer global power into a direction that eventually leads into their hands with this one world government. And so World War II was a part of that. And they completely reshaped Europe coming out of World War II. They established the nation state of Israel, and we see what has come of that. But that was all, and that helped set up World War III. I mean, these guys think 50, 100 years ahead. All right, so what came out of World War II were things like, and I'm not going to go into detail on that, but the end of the war brought in Operation Paperclip. So all the German scientists and spies come over here. The OSS was established during World War II, which became the CIA. Operation Gladio, which were the stay-behind networks that were sort of Germans, so fascist-leaning, but they worked for America to help infiltrate there and grow the spy campaign and that they had running through Europe. And the Cold War with Russia, came out of that, strategic tension. So a lot going on there. We know there were a lot of false flags that have, and those events have steered us in the direction that we're in today, and what has caused a lot of the sort of strife, the strategic tension. Then you go into the Korean War, and that created strategic tension between, North and South Korea, China, and all that. All right, so what came after that was Bretton Woods. That's the monetary policy and the way we operate today. And again, this is wonky stuff, so I'm not going to get really far into it. I'm just going to kind of speed read through these, what I do cover. But, it's worth reading to help understand what we've taken for granted most of our entire lives, because this was set in place in 1944. And even though it took some time to get all of the elements of it to work the way it was intended, this is still what we're under today. And again, this is all run by the global elite. They set all this up. And why that's important now is because they're getting ready to flush all this. And they want to create that digital currency and kind of, abandon all of these monetary policies, create a World Bank and a digital currency that we're all tied to with, digital ID and mandatory vaccines and all of that. So the Bretton Woods is what we're under. And people need to educate themselves about it and understand this is a monetary system we need to fight for. And can it be improved? Yes. But do we want to throw it all away and go to digital currency? Hell no. So these are the people that are running all this. We do have these controllers, these global controllers that meet in these groups and they establish these policies. And they are very powerful people. And to a certain degree, we need some of that. Because our economy and our populations and our countries and the diversity and everything, we do need some element of, benevolent overview. And what we've gotten is anything but that. And so we've got to find a way to restore back to that. And so what happened? Again, after Bretton Woods, the next thing is the UN. We all know the UN, was established as this peace, for all countries to get along. We all know it's full-blown, one world, new world order, government, top-down authoritarianism, run by the most despicable evil, worst people on the planet. And so that, again, set the foundation for where we are today. And then I'm going to finish it off. So we're just about done here. I'm going to finish it off with what came several years after that with the UN is the first ever Bilderberg meeting, 1954. And that's when the global plan that we're currently under really, the ones running it really consolidated and began working together was during this. And so we all know what it is. We all know what they do. We all know who they are. And that's what's been guiding our policies to a certain degree since 1954. And one of the things, the last thing here that I want to bring up, so we're almost done, a couple more minutes. I don't know how true what I'm about to discuss is, but I read it and it may be true, it might not be true. But if you all know, I've read, where is it? I've done a couple episodes on silent weapons for quiet wars. That is a profoundly impactful document to read. It's very short reading, 70, 75 pages. And several of those pages are just charts and formulas you don't even need to understand to get the gist. If you read William Cooper's book, Behold the Pale Horse, in chapter 1, he reprints part of that, that book. And he opens it with that, let me see if it says it here. Let's see, chapter 1 presents a document entitled Top Secret Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars, an introductory programming manual, operations research, technical manual. Cooper retitles the document The Illuminati's Declaration of War upon the People of America and notes that it was dated May 1979, explains the document was found inside a used photocopy machine. Who knows if that's a true origin story. They just don't want to put their name on it, so they planted it somewhere for it to get out. Which was purchased, surplus property in 1986. According to Cooper, the document conclusively demonstrates that a reputed Third World War commenced in 1954. The war pits a shadowy organization known as the Bilderberg Group against the governments of the world. The Bilderberg Group uses a method of warfare known as quiet warfare. Their weapons are information, disinformation, and control instead of traditional explosives, aside from a brief introduction. Okay, so if you read that first chapter, he says, he opens with the opening of the Bilderberg meeting. Welcome for the first meeting of the Bilderberg, the 25th anniversary since the establishment of whatever, where they acknowledge that Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars is the manual. And if you go back to my videos of those two, I read some of that where they're basically saying it's imperative that this document remains secret and our plan remains secret, because obviously us proclaiming that this is what we're doing is an open declaration of warfare against humanity. So they admit it, and these warfare systems are everywhere. And if you haven't read it, or maybe, I don't know, I just can't implore people enough to really understand these influences that we're under. They're not just killing us with bullets and suicides and hangings and whatever on these random, but they're destroying society in very, very effective sociological, psychological warfare techniques. And Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars not only lays it all out, it reveals their absolute evil. And one of the statements in it is, we've got to do something, or we can leave them to bludgeon each other to death in constant warfare, which destroys everything, or we can rule over them in a form of benevolent slavery and genocide. And that's the way they think. We are a herd, I even say that, a herd of proliferating barbarians. And we are here to be managed and controlled, just like sheep, just like cattle, just like anything. That's how they see us. And this is, 1954. We are 70 years down that path, and they are absolutely eviscerating everything in sight. And everything from the cultural Marxism, from the Frankfurt School, to the Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. This stuff is unbelievably destructive and has been for decades. And just, so many people are conditioned to they don't even see it anymore, but it's having an effect. It's having an influence. So hopefully this has been a helpful walk down history. If you've watched both episodes, I think there's a lot there. And all of these events were moves on the grand chessboard, I believe, run by a ruling elite at the top of all this. Not just some power structure here or there that decided they want this issue or that issue to be adopted in society or wherever. This is the cartel executing moves on a chessboard over a course of 50 years that when you look at it all at once as a body of work, they've been spectacularly effective. And I could do another one on from 1954 to today, and I may, that will have just as much, impact of here are the world events that they have manipulated and organized and executed and implemented. And here's the effect that it's having on our society that leads us to the doorstep of absolute annihilation is where we are today. And we'll see, and so I'm bringing it all back to today. We will see if Trump, one, actually gets into office, and two, how much he actually does, either by his own choosing or if he just can't get it done because the politics won't allow it. And we'll see what we're made of. because it's going to get chippy. And they're going to come hard at him and hard at everybody that supports him to get some of this done. And at the end of the day, I've always, I'll say it again. I don't know how for real everybody is. I believe Trump genuinely believes and wants to do the things he's saying. I believe he loves this country, and he just, he just has this natural, you know, he is who he says he is. I believe that. But what I don't fully believe, because none of us can fully know, is he controlled somehow by like, here's the things you're going to do and here's the things you're not going to do. Because some of that looked like what he was doing during his first term. Now, he appears to be completely, unchained. He's going for it. And is that a real revelation that he's had to know that he has to go after these people, otherwise we're all dead? Or this was always part of the play? First term radicalization of this side of the aisle. This last Obama's was radicalization of the other side of the aisle. And now we get one more term for further radicalization that'll help pit us against each other for civil war. That may be what this is. Or it may be that he's, it looks like he got there against their will. So there is a certain amount of freedom of movement where you can actually, if you can actually do it, we have to let you. But they're still going to try to keep him out before January 20th. So we'll see. But anyway, here's a bit of a history lesson. Hope you got something out of that. I enjoyed sharing it. Like I've said, I'm devouring this stuff night and day. I can barely remember, small percentage of it, but I still consume it on a daily basis because it's fascinating. And I will continue to learn and grow and figure this stuff out as I go. And hopefully you'll join me and we can figure this stuff out together. All right. Till next time. Thanks.